welcome to Research and Justice for All, a podcast series from Health Affairs. This season is sponsored by the Deloitte Health Equity Institute and focuses on drivers of health. Drivers of health are the conditions of the environment in which people live, work, and play, and the impact they have on health outcomes. At the Institute, we're creating cross-sector collaborations and tools aimed at addressing disparities in drivers of health and structural flaws in the health system. Learn more about how we advance health equity in the show notes.
This is Research and Justice for All, Season 2. I'm your host, Rhea Boyd. Thanks for joining us today. Today we're going to be talking about the intersections between green space and incarceration and the relationship between environmental injustice and carceral control. When I tell you I'm excited about today's episode, y'all, I am excited. And I'm grateful that we're going to be joined by Andrew Winn. Andrew is currently serving as the Executive Director of the Insight Garden Program, also known as IGP, and a leader at the intersection of environmental and criminal justice. Before joining IGP, Andrew played a pivotal role in building the Underground Scholars Initiative at UCLA and Project Rebound at Sacramento State University, both of which are campus equity programs for formerly incarcerated students. Andrew brings a unique perspective to his work as a formerly incarcerated individual who spent 7 years in California state prisons and jails, and he's an avid naturalist who hikes regularly and backpacks. Andrew, welcome to the pod.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here.
Right on. So to start it off, just tell us a little bit more about the Insight Garden Program, or IGP, and what brought you in particular to this work.
IGP started in 2002 at San Quentin, and it is, considered a rehabilitative program by the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, and that the program, serves incarcerated people. And gardening is something that a lot of people can connect with, regardless of your background. And we also know that gardens can serve as a vehicle to open up more doors. So our programs over at San Quentin then ended up growing and blossoming into, 8 other state prisons. We're on 12 prison yards. And through the access of gardens inside state institutions, we're then able to, meet people where they're at, teach permaculture. Permaculture, if you're unfamiliar with it, is just how each plant, each person, each ecosystem, has relationship with the other. And that serves as a real great basis of our learning modalities inside the prisons, inside our prison programs. And on top of that, beyond just our in-prison work, we also do reentry resources. So our services is a coaching model where people who are a part of our program, when they get out, have access to coaching that will help get them closer to where they're wanting to go. Also, we do a number of trips outdoors. So we do camping. We'll do mushroom foraging. We'll do bald eagle boat tours, and really just start opening up what access to the earth means, particularly with those who have been incarcerated. This is a population that is historically marginalized, who has a detachment or misunderstanding of what access to the earth means. And so we do a lot of that. Also, we do a policy and advocacy within the organization. While, we could, present legislation, what we've learned is building relationships with empowered people, whether it's in the legislature or the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, building these relationships and then talk about where we're struggling at as an organization and operating a program inside of a prison or in reentry, we're then able to, create greater access and policy changes. Those are like the 3 main areas: in prison, reentry, and policy and advocacy that Insight Garden works at. For me, what brought me here is, as a previously incarcerated person, I noticed a lot of injustices in my time inside. I remember, one prison, and in a cell right next to me was one of my best friends from the same neighborhood as me. So I've also noticed that, people from my own neighborhood were getting incarcerated. I had friends who were doing life sentences, and recognizing that, we are having to live in prison cells with no AC in the Central Valley. There was a lot of just issues around the environment, the people who were being incarcerated, and the length of time that people were being incarcerated for under these conditions. And also, my connection to nature, what really drew me to becoming the executive director of Inside Garden program is I'm an avid hiker, backpacker. That really opens it up for me. Being able to touch lamb's ear on the trail, identifying poison oak, knowing the burrs or the native plants in the area really allows me to navigate it much easier. And so just connections to the earth mean a lot to me. I will just mention one other thing. I was incarcerated in the early 2000s, and almost 15 years to this day, I was released from prison. And during that time, there was no programs inside. I was, literally locked down for a very long time. So to be able to provide programs inside and to connect with people inside and bring aspects of the earth inside really resonates with me as a person and aligns with my ethos.
Speaking of bringing aspects of the earth, I love how you said that, bringing aspects of the earth inside. You also mentioned that, some of the populations who are disproportionately incarcerated, I'm assuming you're talking about Black folks, to be honest, and maybe even some Latinx populations, people who have lived in landlocked areas, who don't have lived in areas that don't have the resources to really see all of nature. So for the folks that you guys, encounter, how do you overcome what can be like a really long-standing reticence to approach nature in a way that feels at ease, where you can feel that peace there,
That's a great question. It really is destigmatizing what we're encountering. I think of one prison program that we have over in Lancaster. And in that program, we have rosemary growing there. And rosemary grows very well and easily, and it's native to California. So it belongs here. And even in this area where it's like desert, this plant thrives. However, what happens is I asked somebody, I was like, does anybody in this group use this plant? Whether it's for cooking or for medicinal uses. And one guy is like, no, why would I use that plant? I don't trust it. And I'm like, you don't trust it? Tell me more. And he's like, well, I don't know. That plant is right here. It's in prison. And, to me, I'm hearing him, and he has legitimate concerns around a plant that's growing in prison. And I'm like, let me tell you more about this plant. And so I told him more, it's supposed to be here. It long before these fences and electric fences and walls were put up, this plant was here. And then I came back about a month later to that prison, and we did a whole herbalism lesson on that plant. And what we did is we had a further discussion. I pulled out a Materia Medica on the plant. We talked about, some of its uses. I mean, one person is like, it smells like vapor rub. And I'm like, of course it does. Well, of course it does. And another person, learned that it supports hair growth. It's taking nature to new levels, destigmatizing the things that, that they don't understand. Also, one of the big things that I am like fully aware of and I'd like to talk about is like the principles of leave no trace and what that means. And as people who have to live on this earth, we have a responsibility to be stewards and to care for this land and to make it last. We only have one earth that supports us. And so I really enjoy just being able to talk about all the things and understanding, all the little things that come with, growing inside prisons or even like hiking on a trail, being able to talk about it freely and not leave it as something stigmatized is really one of the more important things that we get to do. We don't have to leave things as, as a misunderstanding. We can educate. And I think through education, we can destigmatize and really understand it. And that really ties into the people who are incarcerated, being able to destigmatize who's actually in prison. There's, we know that we over-incarcerate BIPOC folks by wild numbers. We know it's not a secret. And so to destigmatize people the same way that we destigmatize plants, bears, wildlife, pieces of the earth, it's all interconnected. One leads to another. And when we talk about it and frame it that way, there's a deeper understanding from the people who are participating in our reentry work and our in-prison groups. And even when we start do our policy and advocacy, it's destigmatizing the plants that we're trying to bring into the gardens. And we're working with wardens on that and being able to inform, like this does not impact safety and security. This is how we can do it safely. And really just start from there. It's all about educating.
I mean, wow, there was so much there that I want us to just unpack a little bit, maybe starting with this concept of leave no trace and our responsibility to be stewards and care for the land that supports us, because I think you're right in drawing the parallel between our responsibility to care for the land that supports us and our responsibility to care for each other and other people and wildlife. And I love that you were saying that, part of the work is to destigmatize nature as a way to also begin a conversation about destigmatizing ourselves and each other and destigmatizing the relationship between us and what's around us. Because I think there's an important parallel there that what you're endeavoring to do inside prisons is also address a problem that exists outside prisons, with communities of color, like you said, BIPOC groups that have historically suffered from violent forms of racism that have taken from people their various freedoms, whether they were incarcerated or not, taken from people access to medicine, as you mentioned, taken from people access to nature and a sense of comfort among the land that they are meant to care for. And I feel like that taking is happening throughout people's life, whether you are incarcerated or not. And it's also affecting people in their communities, right? Like carceral spaces aren't the only ones that lack green space. Like it's well studied that communities of color are also more likely to live in areas that lack adequate green space, and specifically like lack of shade cover contributes to higher temperatures in those areas, and that those higher temperatures over time. I think there's a 2023 study in The Lancet, a prominent medical journal, that basically out of the UK, they basically found that those higher temperatures over time are what's called like these urban heat islands, areas that are predominantly inhabited by BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, are exposed to hotter, more extreme weather, and that increases their mortality rates too. Like it's a problem that's happening in prisons, and I think you have a beautiful way of helping us all understand the parallels between it happening in prisons and it just happening in general to BIPOC people wherever we find ourselves. Do you want to say more on that? Am I like understanding what you're saying, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely understanding. I think of a particular prison in California. It has this toxic soil. The soil has a fungi in it. And this fungi predominantly impacts Black folks and people of Asian descent. And so this prison is primarily made up of Spanish first speakers within that prison, and then also indigenous folks and white folks. And this is in the middle of the Central Valley. There is a lot of agriculture that goes on, and so there's no trees. This is a very hot and arid place. So you have the heat that, regularly stays above 100 degrees for 5-6 months of the year. And there's no type of shade cover. None of the native species plants are able to thrive there. This is a very nature devoid place that's toxic to people. And we also work really hard over there to create a green space. I was just recently over there last month, and I saw our program, and the plants were just vining the watermelons, the cantaloupes. It looked a bit like a jungle. It was an oasis, like you wouldn't believe, in a very difficult place to live, whether you're a person or you're a plant. And so here we have a place that, impacts that's unhealthy soil. I mean, this soil causes valley fever in the respiratory system. And here we are trying to heal the land, because many plants can actually start filtering the soil, start making it healthy. But it takes work and understanding what nature is, how the earth can heal itself if we just let it. But a prison is meant to be nature devoid. It's meant to create a detachment between the people inside and the earth itself. We have a lot of participants who just love being a part of our program. We have like a waiting list at that particular place, like about 150 people waiting to get into our program, because it is a place where they can grow and touch the soil. One of the things I will just briefly touch on is there's a detachment, and and a lot of the rules are around safety and security. So people aren't allowed to put their hands in the soil, because the prison will see it as a security risk. Somebody can be hiding something, would be an example of like what that security risk can be. And so not even being able to like touch the soil makes it really difficult to be really connected to a land. And so here we have these marginalized groups who are told, you're a danger to us if you get close to it.
Wow. I want to talk more about that. Can you say more about why you believe carceral facilities and the experience of incarceration is designed to sever these connections between nature and self? I think that example you gave is really profound about not even being able to touch soil in some instances. Like, what about incarceration itself do you think is purposeful about keeping people from experiencing nature in that way?
Yeah, I mean, it's always cited safety and security. That's the number one thing. So, some of the carceral facilities don't have trees because it removes lines or sight lines from people with guns in the towers. They need to be able to shoot people, is what they're citing, which, really disturbing to think that, like, we can't have a tree because you need to be able to murder us at any given moment. is really just like, wow. And so there's things like that, or, the hiding of potential contraband inside. It's also like there's a belief that there is, the plants could be used in ways that aren't approved by the prison. So I think one example is there was a volunteer plant, meaning a plant that just grew up on its own at one of the prisons. And it's a native species plant. But then, a security unit saw the plant and says, well, people can get high on this. And we took the blame on that as an organization that brings plants in. They're like, we believe that you had something to do with this, but it's a volunteer. Earth does what she wants. And, we had to really educate them, like, this is a native species plant. It grows in this area. You'll find it in this area. And whether, we brought it in, which we didn't, or it grew here, because, the seed was transferred from somewhere else, that's not my responsibility. But it also shows that if given the opportunity, the earth, she will heal herself if given that opportunity. And so, there is like that severance between what the earth does and what she decides to do and what the prison wants to do. Safety and security is always, the top of mind for prison officials. And so it's up to us at the Inside Garden program to really educate, prison admins. So whether it's the warden, chief deputy warden, the yard captain, to whoever it might be, really just sit down and we talk with them. And that's a lot of what we do. We try to do it once a year so we can, educate them. And I ask wardens, like, how do you see us being able to like meet your needs as a warden? And we use that as an entry point to a conversation where we're like, okay, I see how this could work. Would you be willing to consider this? It's really just kind of, understanding the problems and then coming up with solutions. And it's step by step. We have a goal to create green spaces inside prisons. And while some people will say, oh, you're dressing up a garbage can, right? It is a bit of that, yes, that is valid. However, these are real people inside prisons, whether they're incarcerated or they're medical workers or they're custody staff. These are people who have to be here every single day to, either to serve their sentence or to put food on their family's table. And green spaces is one of the ways to make the environment more healthy. I'm a firm believer that, particularly like in the Central Valley where we have high temperatures, that green spaces can also reduce some of the heat, not just on the ground, but also offer shade. I mean, where I live in Sacramento, our utility district offers rebates for planting trees. I mean, here we have like all these other, these entities who are very supportive in trying to create shade and green spaces. And then we have a prison system that wants to remove it. And then we talk about our climate crisis. And then we talk about the criminal justice system as two separate things, but they're one and the same.
I mean, let's get into that for a second. This might be a sticky issue on the pod, but I think we should talk about it. I think one of the things you raised is like kind of a question as to what do we lose as a society to uphold the idea of safety and security? Because this is a larger question that also emanates from outside of prisons as well, right? Like this is just a national conversation we had around the role of police in advancing or detracting from certain groups' feeling of public safety. And the question we had to ask is, what kind of death and what level of death are we willing to accept for a level of perceived safety and perceived security that's never fully shared across groups, like racial groups when it comes to police violence. We know communities of color, and particularly Black and Indigenous populations, have the highest rates of police-related mortality and death. And then the incarcerated versus the rest of us who are outside. Like what are we willing to tolerate for folks who are incarcerated, knowing that while we can pretend that there's like a border to prisons, when it comes to the environment and the earth, all of the land is shared. Prisons have an environmental impact that affects more than the folks who are confined there. And so, one, I think that was profound, what you just shared. And two, do you have a sense about how we reconcile that? Like, this is why the conversation about police has always been a non-starter, because as soon as anybody brings up safety, and to be frank, as soon as white people bring up feeling unsafe, we as a society have said we feel okay with a certain degree of Black death, disproportionate Black death, even child Black death, which is one of my advocacy interests, is the effect of police violence on children's development and well-being. Like, we've said we're okay with that in a certain sense. And it's a tough job to be a warden, and it is a violent place. And how can they stay safe in this job, but also create green space? You know what I mean? Like, do you have a sense about is there a way to reconcile that tension, or are we thinking about it in the right way? Is it safety versus green space, or safety versus police violence, as I set up a parallel? Or should we frame it differently?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot to kind of unpack there. I will just start off by saying, addressing whatever issues, social issues, in prison issues, it's multi-causal. So it takes a real holistic approach in addressing the issues that are in front of us. We've been caught up in a one-size-fits-all kind of safety, and that's not what safety looks like. Safety is building the infrastructure to be able to address the problems in front of us. So whether it is violence, whether it is poverty, whether it's nourishment. And so rather than addressing, those issues, we've just said, let's just give guns, or let's just insert violence here as a way to control it. And that's not control. That's a system that's not working for all of us. And we have to really understand and unpack and pull back the layers of these problems that we're addressing. In California, there's been a lot of work to make prisons safer for the people who have to live there, the currently incarcerated, to the people who have to work there. And that happens through understanding the problems. I remember what I told you at the beginning of this podcast, where, I wasn't allowed to do programs. We were on lockdowns for months at a time. And what does that do to somebody? What does that leave somebody to think about? It's magnifying the little problems. It's creating a separation between us and them, even amongst, incarcerated populations, right? We're broken up and racialized into certain groups. And, it feels like an us and them. So people are on heightened awareness. They, are just, feel like they're under attack. And when your mind is thinking about that and not thinking about a garden, that is where the energy is given. And so California, I will say, has done a better job in the last 10 years at providing more access to programs than they've ever had. Now, there's still lots of room of improvement. This is not me giving them an attaboy. What I am trying to say is we are seeing the impact by, people returning to prisons, by the amount of violence being done inside prisons. And there's much more work to be done around what we can do to address safety and security and not make it a one-size-fits-all. I mean, I use this example for a lot of people to help them understand like how I envision a future. And the future is cancer, and another person has both prescribed them chemo, right? Just because you have a cold doesn't mean you get the same treatment as somebody who has another illness, right? And so we have to really start to understand, like, okay, this person is experiencing poverty in this kind of way, where they're housing insecure, they have food insecurities. How do we start addressing housing? How do we start addressing access to healthy foods? And the same thing goes with safety and security. Like, not everybody deserves to be locked up. Let's understand what happened and how they got to this position. We see people all the time having mental health episodes whose parent, their guardian is calling the police or calling 911 for help. Why are we sending the police there? They're not social workers, right? Like, why do we not have the infrastructure to actually address the problem in front of us? We're using a one-size-fits-all to address safety, and it's not safe. It's not safe for, guardians to call 911 when guns and use of force is one of the first things that are employed. And so I think it's, really important that we start figuring out more ways to create safety. And for us at Inside Garden Program, it's getting people out of their prison cells, participating in a group, understanding the ecology and the environment and how we are very much a part of it. We see ourselves as separate, as if we're, different from the environment, but we're one and the same. And, it's being able to understand that aspect of it. It's also knowing that, like, giving somebody something to do and focus on like caring and tending to plants, tending to their environment, that starts to make a difference. It's being able to stimulate somebody's mind in a way that hasn't always been stimulated. It makes a difference. It's being able to see, green spaces and have shade. That starts to make a difference. It's being able to pick berries and then share them with somebody else who may or may not look like you. It's being able to understand that we're in this together, whether you're incarcerated or not. And so I think an approach to safety and security is understanding us as a whole is not a one-size-fits-all, but a holistic approach to the issues that we're all facing. And just because it's not happening to you today doesn't mean it's not going to happen to you tomorrow. And I think we have to think a little bit bigger and how we can be very supportive of each other.
I mean, all of that I think is spot on, that this one-size-fits-all violent approach to safety has failed us. That, evidence shows it's not keeping us all safe. It doesn't even make us all feel safe. And inside prisons, as you said, it magnifies the problem. And I like this idea of focusing people's attention on something else that is nurturing as a way for people to also maybe even internalize that nurturing nature to themselves and direct it towards other people. In that vein, you mentioned the shortened life expectancy of correctional officers. Like, do you feel like an intervention like this is needed for people who work in prisons, who spend most of their days in these environments, that, they also need a different relationship to nature as a way to have a different relationship to the inmates they oversee?
Yeah, I really, believe so. I mean, one is, if the incarcerated population is doing better, that makes their job easier. If it feels like, somebody's being attacked all the time or being surveilled in such a way it starts impacting the psyche, I think it makes it for a harder workplace. And so being able to, be in a building that's a little bit cooler because of shade, being able to look at something that's beautiful, seeing, pollinators come in and going to certain plants, seeing the sunflowers, seeing and participating in seeing how nature interacts with each other. It just makes it a better workplace. It makes it a better environment to be living in. And I envision a place where we can, address the environmental issues. And of course, there are so many other things that are, need to be addressed. But, our focus at Inside Garden program is addressing the environmental issues, understanding its impact to currently incarcerated people and its impact to custody staff. We want to offer care. We have we often say in the Inside Garden program, this is an ecosystem of care that we try to provide, just as there's communities of care, and trying to think of all the just all the different ways that we can be supportive of each other. If somebody has to show up to work every day, how can we make their job easier? And if it means working with an incarcerated population in a way that they're learning, in a way that subsides their anxieties, a way that allows them to see the macro, it will impact the people who have to work there, whether custody staff or even medical staff.
Yes, and I just wanted to make a note. I think I've been using the wrong term throughout this whole podcast. I've been using the word inmate when I really should say currently incarcerated person. And I apologize for that. And I want to offer it to our audience as maybe a shift in the terms y'all use as well.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm kind of sad this is coming to a close because I have there's a lot there. There's a lot there about the relationship between environment and humans and how that relationship is devalued and uninvested in incarcerated spaces, and what that means for the rest of society, where we also don't see these connections always being fostered. Thank you so much for being here. Today, we've been talking to Andrew Winn, who currently serves as the executive director of the Inside Garden program, or IGP, and is a leader at the intersection of environmental and criminal justice. Andrew, I personally am so grateful we have this opportunity to learn more about your work and consider these really provocative themes about access to nature as a human right, and about what happens in prisons being both a reflection of and a part of what's happening in the rest of society in terms of our access to green space for certain communities and safety, and whether, what are the means in which we all can stay safe. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
This is Research and Justice for All from Health Affairs, Season 2. If you like what you heard today or you're interested in our future upcoming episodes, be sure to click subscribe or send it to a friend.